Have you ever found yourself stuck in a moment of your life, unable to move past a mistake or a broken relationship? A point where the future seemed uncertain, and the weight of the past was too heavy to carry? Well, this is a story about two people, Michael and Sarah, whose lives, once intertwined, fell apart. But this isn't just a tale of heartbreak and betrayal. It's about redemption, growth, and the courage to start over. In a world where it's easy to run from pain, Michael and Sarah found themselves in places they never expected. But instead of remaining victims of their circumstances, they discovered that the real challenge was healing. So, what happens when we finally face our demons, learn from our past, and take the first step toward a brighter future? Can we truly move on from the people we used to be? Join me today, as we follow Michael and Sarah through the twists and turns of their journey, one where every choice, every step forward, leads them closer to the most important realization of all, the power of change. Sarah Davis was a dedicated physical therapist, known for her expertise and compassionate care. She had built a solid reputation in her field, helping countless patients regain mobility after injury. But despite her professional success, Sarah felt a void in her life. She had been married to her husband, Michael, for over a decade. He was a hard-working construction supervisor, dedicated to his job and the future he was building for them. On paper, their life together was everything anyone could want, stable, comfortable, and secure. But for Sarah, it had grown routine, and in the quiet moments, she found herself longing for something more. As Sarah prepared for a week-long professional development seminar in Aspen, Colorado, her mind drifted back to her marriage. Michael had always been a good man, patient, loyal, and supportive, but lately, there was a distance between them. They'd stopped talking about the things that mattered, and every evening felt like an empty ritual rather than a shared experience. Sarah found herself seeking distractions, things that gave her a sense of excitement, anything to fill the growing emptiness. Michael noticed the changes in her. Her late nights at work, her increasingly distant demeanor, and the strange absences that she would offer vague explanations for. He tried to approach her, asking if something was wrong, but Sarah always brushed him off with a smile and a quick excuse. She was fine, or so she said. Yet, deep inside, Michael's instincts told him something wasn't right. The turning point came when Sarah mentioned her upcoming trip to Aspen. "It's a great opportunity, Michael. Dr. Richard Stone, you know the one I've mentioned, will be there," she said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. But Michael felt a flicker of unease. As Sarah prepared for her trip, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He began to pay closer attention to the little things, her phone, the late-night texts, the increasing frequency of her unexplained absences. One evening, after Sarah had left for another of her work dinners, Michael found himself alone in their home. He sat in the quiet of their living room, running his hand across the surface of the coffee table. His gaze landed on her phone, left carelessly on the counter. His heart pounded in his chest as he picked it up. The screen lit up, revealing a string of texts. Michael hesitated, but something compelled him to read them. The messages weren't from colleagues. They were from Dr. Richard Stone. Michael's stomach twisted as he scrolled through the exchange. Each message was flirtatious, intimate, and left little doubt that something more was going on. Sarah had been having an affair with Richard Stone for the past few months. Michael stood frozen, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. Sarah, the woman he had devoted himself to, the one who had once been his best friend, had betrayed him. His hands shook as he set the phone down. He needed answers. When Sarah returned from Aspen, Michael confronted her. The conversation was explosive. Sarah tried to defend herself, her voice trembling. She admitted to the affair but justified it with words that cut deeper than any betrayal. "I didn't know what else to do, Michael. I've been lonely. You've been so focused on work, and I needed more. Richard made me feel alive again." The air was thick with anger and disbelief. Michael demanded an explanation, but instead of guilt, Sarah seemed to offer excuses. She wasn't sorry for what had happened, just for getting caught. Tom was heartbroken. He had given everything to their marriage, and now, everything was in ruins. He felt like he had lost not only his wife but the future they had built together. He had always been the dependable one, the one who sacrificed his dreams for the sake of their stability. And now, Sarah had walked away from that. Enough, Michael said, his voice cold. I need time to think. Michael didn't want to make any decisions out of pure anger, but he couldn't shake the desire for justice. He hired a private investigator, someone who could dig deeper into Sarah's life and uncover everything she had been hiding. The investigator quickly found evidence of Sarah's relationship with Richard Stone, including phone records, hotel bookings, and financial transactions that pointed to questionable dealings at her clinic. Michael knew he needed more than just personal betrayal. He needed to expose the truth, everything. He consulted with a lawyer, who advised him on the legal steps he could take. He filed a formal complaint with the medical board, alleging misconduct and improper relationships between Sarah and Dr. Stone. An official investigation was soon underway. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. Sarah lost her job at the clinic, and her professional reputation took a massive hit. Colleagues and friends turned their backs on her, unable to justify her actions. She was called into multiple disciplinary hearings, where the evidence against her was undeniable. Richard Stone's involvement also came to light, and he, too, faced the repercussions of his actions. Sarah's world crumbled around her. The affair, the financial discrepancies, and the tarnished reputation left her in a state of devastation. But even as her career fell apart, her relationship with Richard ended too. He distanced himself, eager to protect his own reputation, and Sarah was left alone, broken. Meanwhile, Michael began to rebuild. He threw himself into work, his reputation as a skilled construction supervisor solidifying further. But it wasn't just about work. He found comfort in volunteering with local charities, helping people who had suffered similar pain. Through this, he started to rebuild his self-esteem and found a new purpose. Months passed, and Sarah reached out to Michael. She sent him letters, tried to contact him, and even showed up at his workplace a few times. Please, Michael. I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please give me a chance to make it right, she pleaded. Michael, hardened by betrayal, ignored her attempts. He had already given her more than enough chances, and now it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. One evening, Sarah arrived unannounced at his home. I've lost everything, Michael. Everything I worked for. I need your help, just one more time, she begged. Michael stood at the door, looking at the woman who had once been his partner, his love. But the wounds were too deep, and the trust was too shattered. No, Sarah. You need to live with the choices you made. I can't carry your mistakes for you anymore. With those final words, Michael turned away and closed the door. Sarah stood outside for a long time, lost and alone. As Michael moved forward with his life, taking a job offer in another city, a new chapter awaited him. But he carried with him the lessons learned from the destruction of his marriage. He was stronger now, ready to face whatever the future had in store. While Sarah's life spiraled downward, Michael's was slowly but steadily getting back on track. He had secured a major project in a new city, a construction project that would challenge him and allow him to put all his years of experience into something meaningful. Moving to a new place, starting fresh, felt like exactly what he needed. It was a chance to break free from the shadows of the past and focus solely on his future. However, despite his physical distance from Sarah, their tangled history followed him in small, unexpected ways. Michael found himself lying awake some nights, wondering how Sarah was coping with the wreckage of her life. There were times when he felt a flicker of sympathy, a momentary weakness where he questioned whether he had made the right choice. But then he remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the way everything had crumbled when he trusted her the most. Back in their former hometown, Sarah was trying to pick up the pieces of a life she had shattered with her own hands. She had lost her job, her reputation, and, most painfully, the trust of those who once called her a friend. Yet, she couldn't move on. The guilt was suffocating. She had sought forgiveness from Michael, but his rejection had sent her spiraling into self-doubt. She tried to get help, seeing a therapist to confront the deep emotional void that had led her to make such damaging choices. But even with professional help, Sarah struggled to understand what had driven her to betray the one person who had been there for her, for better or worse. The affair with Richard Stone had seemed like a fleeting escape, but it had cost her everything: her marriage, her career, and her sense of self. Months went by, and Sarah eventually found herself in a new, low-paying job at a local health center. It was far from the prestigious position she once held, but it was something she had to start over from. The work was rewarding in a way, but it never filled the emptiness she felt. She kept a low profile in the town, doing her job without drawing attention to herself, hoping that people might forget her past mistakes. Meanwhile, Michael found that his new city and work were exactly what he needed. He had become a respected leader in the company, overseeing projects that would shape the skyline of the new city. The work was demanding, but it filled the void Sarah had once occupied. He had stopped thinking about her as much, though the occasional memory would surface. One evening, as Michael sat at a local cafe after a long day of work, he bumped into an old colleague from his previous job, a mutual friend he hadn't seen in years. The reunion felt almost surreal, a reminder that he had left a life behind him, one that had once been filled with love, dreams, and ambitions that now seemed distant. Their conversation started innocently enough. But when the topic of Sarah came up, Michael's face darkened. He wasn't proud of what had happened, but the wounds were still raw. His colleague, seeing the tension in his expression, gently steered the conversation away from painful memories. But it was clear to Michael that, even though the past was behind him, it would never fully leave him. As the months passed, Michael became more settled in his new life. He made new friends, embraced the challenges of his job, and even started dating again. It wasn't easy, he had been deeply scarred by the betrayal, but he knew he couldn't let it define his future. One evening, after a long day at work, Michael received a message from an unexpected source, his former therapist. "Sarah has requested another meeting with you," it read. "She's in town, seeking closure. It seems she's reached a breaking point in her journey." For a moment, Michael stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. He had made it clear to Sarah that he wanted nothing more to do with her, but the message stirred something inside him. He felt a mix of curiosity, anger, and perhaps, just a tiny bit of sympathy. The choice to meet was his to make, but should he? After much contemplation, Michael decided that meeting Sarah one last time might offer the closure both of them needed. He arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe in the city, the same place where they had shared some of their happiest moments before everything had fallen apart. When he saw her sitting at the table, looking older, tired, and defeated, he almost didn't recognize her. Sarah had once been so vibrant, full of life and ambition. But now, she seemed smaller, humbled by the weight of her own mistakes. "I didn't know if you'd come," Sarah said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I had to ask for one last chance, not for reconciliation, but for forgiveness, for what I did to you." Michael took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. He had spent so long trying to forget everything that had happened, trying to build a new life. But facing her now, he realized how much unresolved pain still lingered. "You know, Sarah, I've tried to move on. I've built a life without you. But even now, it feels like I'm still carrying your burden. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish, and I regret it every day," Sarah admitted, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know I can't change what I did, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am." The words hung in the air between of the anger, and I'm moving forward. I've had to rebuild my life, and it's been hard, but I've learned to live without the weight of resentment. Sarah nodded, tears still threatening to spill, but she seemed at peace with his decision. That's all I can ask for, she whispered. To know that you're at peace, even if I'm not part of your life anymore. The conversation was quiet for a while, both of them reflecting on the past and the painful journey that had brought them to this point. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no grand gesture of forgiveness, just two people acknowledging their hurt, their mistakes, and their personal growth. As the conversation wound down, Sarah stood up, her chair scraping softly against the floor. I have to go, she said. But thank you. I don't expect anything from you anymore. I just needed to say that. Michael watched her walk away, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. She had been a huge part of his life, and now, they were strangers. He wasn't sure if he could ever truly forgive her, but perhaps he didn't need to. Sometimes, the most important thing was letting go, not for the other person, but for yourself. In the weeks that followed, Michael continued his new life with more clarity. His work in the new city flourished, and he even started to explore things he had once neglected, traveling, making new friends, and living without the constant weight of his past. He began to realize that while his marriage had been a part of him, it no longer defined who he was or who he wanted to be. He had learned the hard way that people change, situations change, and sometimes, the only thing you can do is embrace the future and move on. Sarah, on the other hand, took the first steps toward rebuilding her own life. While she had lost her career and the respect of many, she began to find small moments of peace. She continued her therapy, worked hard at her new job, and slowly, though painfully, started to rebuild her relationships with the few people who hadn't turned their backs on her. She didn't expect to ever be forgiven, but she learned to forgive herself. She knew her journey was long, but every day she was trying to move forward, to become the person she should have been all along. Michael's new chapter was about more than just work and moving away from his past, it was about redefining his own worth. He found new meaning in volunteering, getting involved in local initiatives that helped at-risk youth and provided support for families in need. He realized that his true fulfillment came not from the material things or the successes at work, but from giving back. Through this work, he found a sense of purpose that he had never known before, and he began to heal in ways he never anticipated. One day, while walking through a park in the city, he ran into a familiar face, Lisa, an old college friend who had always been supportive, always listened when he needed someone. The casual conversation turned into something deeper, as they talked about their lives and what they had been through. Michael realized that, even though he had moved on from his marriage, life still had a way of surprising him. Maybe, just maybe, there was space for love in his life again, but this time, it would be on his terms. Meanwhile, Sarah's journey of self-forgiveness continued. One evening, she received an email from an old patient who had once been a mentor to her. The email simply read, "I've been following your journey from a distance, and I want you to know that I believe in you. You can rise again. Don't give up." It wasn't a miraculous solution, but for Sarah, it was a small yet significant sign that perhaps she wasn't as lost as she had once believed. The healing process for both Michael and Sarah would never be linear. There were days when they each doubted themselves, when the scars from the past seemed too deep to overcome. But in the quiet moments, they both knew something important: they had been given a second chance, an opportunity to redefine who they were and what they wanted from life. The months that followed Michael's conversation with Lisa were a time of reflection and growth. Though he had finally found a sense of peace in his new life, a small part of him still wondered about what could have been. But he refused to let the past dictate his future. The project he was working on was coming to a close, and it had been a resounding success, securing his reputation further in the city. Still, there was a void inside of him, one that he couldn't quite fill with work or new friendships. He was starting to feel that perhaps it was time to open his heart again, if not to love, then at least to the idea of moving forward in a new, unexpected way. It was during this period of change that he received an unexpected call. It was from his old mentor, a man who had helped guide him during his early years in the construction field. "Michael," the voice on the phone said, "I have a proposition for you. We need someone with your experience on a new project. It's big, really big. I'm talking international. What do you say?" The opportunity was a game changer. A project overseas that could completely redefine Michael's career. It was risky, exciting, and most importantly, it felt like the challenge he had been waiting for. Without a second thought, he agreed, setting the stage for a new chapter in his life, one that would take him far away from the memories of the past, and perhaps into new adventures that could help him build the life he had always dreamed of. Meanwhile, Sarah had been working tirelessly to rebuild her life, but things were far from easy. She had secured a low-level position at a health clinic, a far cry from the prestigious position she once held. The job was fulfilling in its own right, but it didn't come without its challenges. She was constantly reminded of her past mistakes, not just by the people around her, but by her own inner voice, which never seemed to let her forget. She had been trying to make amends, reaching out to old colleagues and friends in an attempt to re-establish some semblance of a support system. But it was a slow process, and the guilt of what she had done to Michael weighed heavily on her. Despite her best efforts, there was a lingering emptiness in her life, one that she couldn't quite shake. She knew she had to let go of the past, but it was easier said than done. One afternoon, as Sarah was volunteering at a local shelter for abused women, she met a woman named Elena, who had recently escaped an abusive relationship. Elena's story resonated deeply with Sarah, and their connection was immediate. They began talking regularly, sharing their life experiences and supporting each other through their struggles. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she wasn't entirely alone. Through Elena's encouragement, Sarah began to focus less on her past and more on her future. She started working towards certifications that would allow her to specialize in trauma therapy. It wasn't easy, she had to balance her job with her studies and continued personal work, but for the first time in years, she had hoped that she could rebuild her life into something more meaningful than it had been before. Months later, Sarah found herself in a position she never thought possible. She was standing outside a community center, a place where she had once volunteered, waiting to meet someone who had asked to speak with her. As she checked her watch nervously, a familiar figure appeared in the distance, Michael. She had heard through mutual acquaintances that he was in town, finishing up some projects before leaving for an international opportunity. He had sent her a text, asking if they could talk. Michael had spent the past few months reflecting on his own life, his new direction, and his evolving feelings about Sarah. While he had moved on, he realized that there were still unresolved emotions. He wasn't expecting closure, but there was something inside him that made him want to hear her out, even if only for the sake of their past. "Hi," Michael said softly, a cautious smile on his face. "I wasn't sure if you'd agree to meet me, but I've been thinking a lot. About everything." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, taking in his calm demeanor. She still felt the weight of the years that had passed, but she could see that he had moved forward in his own way. "I wasn't sure either," she replied, her voice quieter than she'd intended. "But I think it's time. We've both changed." They sat down at a bench near the center, the conversation awkward at first, with pauses and hesitant words. Sarah spoke about her journey toward healing and how she had learned to cope with her guilt and regret. Michael listened intently, not interrupting, just absorbing her words. He could sense that she was truly trying to make amends, but he also knew that the past could never be erased. "I don't expect forgiveness, Michael," Sarah said, looking up at him. "But I needed you to know that I've been working on myself. I'm not the same person I was when we were married." Michael nodded. "I can see that. And for what it's worth, I've learned a lot too. I've moved on, Sarah. I'm at peace with where I am, and I think you can get there too." For the first time in years, there was no animosity between them. They weren't trying to fix the past, but they were both acknowledging that their lives had intersected for a reason, and that it had changed them. The conversation ended with a sense of mutual respect, even if they weren't exactly friends. They had come to terms with what had happened, and that was enough. In the days that followed, Sarah and Michael went their separate ways once again. Sarah continued her work at the shelter, slowly building a life that felt more authentic and purposeful. She completed her trauma therapy certification and began offering counseling to women who had endured abuse, helping them heal just as she had. Michael, on the other hand, boarded a plane to his new international project, ready to start another chapter in his life. As he sat by the window of the plane, looking out at the vast sky, he realized that life was full of unexpected turns. The journey he was about to embark on wasn't just about work, it was about embracing change, pursuing growth, and allowing himself to be open to whatever the future held. As Michael settled into his new life overseas, the cityscape of his new environment was both exhilarating and intimidating. The tall buildings and bustling streets were a far cry from the quiet suburbs he once called home. But something about this new chapter energized him. There was no longer any shadow of his past hanging over him, no unfinished business weighing on his heart. He had a fresh start, one that he was determined to make count. His first few months on the international project were spent getting acclimated to the culture, learning the intricacies of the work, and forging new relationships with his colleagues. His new team was diverse, full of professionals from all over the world. Among them was Maya, a fellow project manager with an infectious enthusiasm for innovation. She had a way of making the most difficult challenges seem surmountable, and Michael found himself drawn to her resilience and quick wit. As their professional relationship deepened, there was an undeniable chemistry between them. It wasn't the whirlwind romance he had once known, nor was it something he had expected. Maya was grounded, kind, and offered him a sense of companionship he had been missing. But Michael knew better now. He didn't rush into relationships. He didn't look for distractions or replacements. He simply let things unfold at their own pace. Their first dinner together, a casual affair after a long day of work, was marked by laughter and shared stories about their respective journeys. Maya spoke of her past, her own struggles with family expectations and the weight of cultural norms that often left her feeling torn. Michael listened intently, grateful for the sense of understanding that came from simply being heard. "Sometimes I think life is just one big puzzle," Maya said with a smile. "And we're all just trying to figure out where each piece fits." Michael agreed. "I used to think that I had the pieces all figured out. Then everything fell apart. But I've come to realize that the pieces keep changing, and that's okay." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "That's true. Maybe the trick isn't to keep everything in place, it's to embrace when things shift, and trust that the new pieces will eventually form a better picture." Michael had never considered life that way, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hope for the future. Perhaps he wasn't as far from true happiness as he had believed. Back home, Sarah had been working steadily at the clinic and volunteering at the women's shelter, helping women overcome trauma and reclaim their lives. She had built a small but supportive community around her. Her bond with Elena had grown stronger, and the two had become close friends, offering each other both personal and professional support. Through Elena's encouragement, Sarah had also begun working on a book, something she never thought she would have the courage to do. The book was an exploration of her journey from betrayal to redemption, the lessons she had learned, and the ways she had healed. Writing became an outlet for Sarah's thoughts and emotions, a way for her to make sense of her own path. But it wasn't easy. Some days, she struggled with the painful memories, the guilt, and the weight of her own mistakes. However, as she wrote, Sarah began to discover something incredible. Writing allowed her to let go of the anger and the sadness she had carried for so long. It gave her a way to confront her past with grace and understanding. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her favorite cafe working on her manuscript, she received a call from her former colleague, Dr. Miller. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm and reassuring, "I've been following your progress. I've seen the changes in you. And I believe it's time for you to return to the field. There's a position opening up at the trauma center, and I think you're the perfect fit. What do you say? Sarah had never imagined herself returning to her old career after everything that had happened. But now, sitting in the quiet cafe with her manuscript in hand, she realized how far she had come. It was more than just a job offer, it was a chance for her to make a real difference in people's lives, and perhaps, in her own as well. She smiled, a genuine sense of excitement filling her chest. "I'll take it," she said, her voice filled with newfound confidence. As she hung up the phone, Sarah reflected on her journey. It had been a painful one, filled with mistakes and regrets. But now, she was stepping into a future that was full of potential. She no longer saw herself as a woman defined by her past mistakes, but as someone who was actively shaping her own story, one page at a time. Months later, Michael returned to the city for a short break before heading off on another project. He had been traveling back and forth between countries, managing projects and expanding his network. The demands were high, but the rewards were even greater. He had found his rhythm, his purpose, and yet, there was still a sense of curiosity lingering about how Sarah had fared. One rainy afternoon, while walking through the city's bustling art district, he saw a familiar face standing outside a bookstore. Sarah. She was holding a cup of coffee, smiling at someone who appeared to be a colleague or friend. At first, Michael hesitated, unsure of how they would interact after everything that had transpired. But something about her presence, the way she looked so at ease in her own skin, gave him the courage to walk up to her. "Sarah," he said, his voice tentative but warm. She turned, and for a brief moment, both of them were silent. The years had passed, but they shared a kind of understanding now, a quiet acknowledgement of the past that didn't need to be spoken. "Michael," Sarah said, her smile genuine. "It's been a while." "It has," Michael replied, his tone light. "I was just passing through. I heard you were doing well." She nodded. "I am. I'm writing now. It's been healing. And I just started a new job at the trauma center. I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be." Michael nodded, genuinely happy for her. "That's amazing, Sarah. I'm glad to hear it." They stood there for a few moments, catching up on the years that had passed, and though neither of them lingered too long, there was a mutual sense of respect and peace between them. Michael had found his purpose in his work and his newfound community, and Sarah had found hers in helping others heal. Neither one of them was looking for a romantic reunion, but there was a quiet recognition that their lives had intersected for a reason. They had both changed, for better or for worse, and both were now on paths that were uniquely their own. As Michael said goodbye and walked down the street, he couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Not just with Sarah, but with his entire past. He wasn't the man he had once been, and that was something he could live with. Michael's work took him overseas again, and Sarah's career continued to flourish. While their paths may never cross in the same way again, they had both learned that life's most significant lessons often came through the hardest moments. And sometimes, the most important relationships aren't the ones that last forever, but the ones that teach you the most about who you are and who you want to become. As the months passed, Michael's life in the international construction field continued to expand, and with it, so did his understanding of what he truly wanted. The overseas project had been a resounding success, but the nature of the work was demanding, with little time for relaxation or personal pursuits. Yet, it was exactly the kind of challenge he needed to keep pushing forward, to keep moving away from his past. However, something about the constant travel began to feel tiring. The fleeting connections he made with people in different cities were shallow, and while his professional achievements were commendable, there was a sense that his personal life was still in limbo. One evening, after a particularly long workday, Michael found himself sitting alone in his apartment. His phone lit up with a message notification. It was from Maya, his colleague who had become a close friend. "Hey, Michael, how about we catch up over the weekend? There's a new restaurant I've been wanting to try. The invitation felt different. It wasn't just about work anymore. Maya had become a consistent presence in his life, and there was a comfort in her friendship that he hadn't realized he was missing. As they sat across from each other at the restaurant, Maya asked about his life. "So, what's next for you, Michael? Another project, or are you going to slow down?" Michael took a moment to think before answering. "I've been wondering that myself. I've been so focused on climbing the ladder and proving myself. But now, I'm starting to feel like I've lost touch with what really matters. Maybe it's time to focus on building something more lasting." Maya looked at him with a knowing expression. "You've been running from something, haven't you? Maybe not physically, but emotionally. I can see it in the way you avoid settling down." Michael didn't respond right away. He wasn't used to such directness, but he appreciated her candor. "I think you're right," he said quietly. "I've been running from my past, from the guilt I feel about Sarah, and from the idea that I might never truly move on. But, maybe I need to start facing it instead of always moving forward with my work as a distraction." Maya smiled softly. "I think you'll be okay. You just need to start living for yourself, not just for the next project or the next goal." As the evening ended, Michael realized that his path wasn't necessarily about avoiding the past, but about understanding how it had shaped him and moving forward with it, not as a burden, but as a lesson. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to constantly move on. Back home, Sarah's journey continued with its own set of challenges, but with a renewed sense of determination. Her work at the trauma center was incredibly fulfilling, yet emotionally exhausting. She had found a purpose in helping others reclaim their lives, but there were days when the weight of their stories felt overwhelming. Still, she knew that this work was her calling. One particular case stood out, a young woman named Chloe who had recently escaped an abusive relationship. Chloe had been struggling with trust and guilt, and it was clear that the emotional scars ran deep. As Sarah worked with her, she couldn't help but reflect on her own journey of betrayal and healing. One afternoon, as they sat in Sarah's office, Chloe looked at her with tears in her eyes. "How did you get through it? I mean, the pain of losing everything." Sarah took a deep breath, her thoughts briefly drifting to Michael, to the life she had once had. "It wasn't easy. I lost a lot. But I learned that forgiveness, first for myself, and then for others, was the key. I had to let go of my own guilt, to realize that the mistakes I made don't define me. I'm not perfect, but I can choose to move forward, no matter what." Chloe nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I think I can do that too." As the months went on, Sarah began to see changes not only in her clients but also in herself. She had become stronger, more confident, and far more comfortable in her own skin. In addition to her work, she had started sharing her story publicly, offering motivational talks for those who had experienced trauma. She even began writing her own book, which now included her experiences as a therapist and her journey of self-forgiveness. But even with all her progress, there was still one thing Sarah couldn't avoid, the void of loneliness. As fulfilling as her work was, she still felt disconnected from her peers. Relationships had always been complicated for her, and she couldn't help but wonder if she'd ever find the kind of love and partnership she once had. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, she decided to go for a walk. As she strolled through the park, reflecting on everything she had overcome, she received a message on her phone. It was from Elena, the woman she had met at the shelter. "Elena, I've been thinking, you've come so far, Sarah. I want to introduce you to someone. Someone who I think could really connect with you. Meet me for coffee tomorrow." Intrigued, Sarah agreed. The next day, she met Elena at a cozy cafe, where Elena introduced her to her friend, a fellow trauma counselor named Anna. Anna was warm, articulate, and shared many of the same values as Sarah. As they talked about their work and life experiences, Sarah found herself opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone in a long time. Anna listened without judgment, and for the first time, Sarah felt that spark of connection with someone who truly understood her. The next few months marked the beginning of a new phase for both Sarah and Michael. Michael began to take more time for himself, still traveling for work but intentionally carving out moments for personal growth and reflection. He started to reconnect with old friends and even considered pursuing a more stable position that would allow him to put down roots, something he had never truly allowed himself before. Sarah, on the other hand, found herself moving into a new chapter of her life as well. Her relationship with Anna deepened, and while it was still early, there was a feeling of something truly meaningful beginning to blossom. She had found a new sense of balance, both in her career and in her personal life. For the first time in years, she felt that the pieces of her life were falling into place. One day, as Sarah was sitting in her office after a long week of work, she received a message from Michael. It had been a while since they last spoke, and though their paths had diverged, there was a sense of closure in hearing from him again. "Hey, Sarah," the message read. "I've been thinking about our last conversation. I just wanted to say that I'm doing well. I've learned a lot, and I hope you're finding the peace you deserve. Take care of yourself, okay?" Sarah smiled as she read the message, feeling a sense of gratitude for the man who had once been her partner. She responded simply, "Thank you, Michael. I hope you're doing well too." As she put her phone down, Sarah felt at peace. She wasn't looking for closure anymore. She wasn't chasing after something she thought she had lost. She had learned to embrace the present, to focus on what was in front of her, and to keep moving forward. A year later, Michael returned to the city on a brief break. This time, there was no message of reconciliation or unfinished business. He wasn't here to confront the past, but simply to visit old friends and enjoy the progress he had made. He met with Maya, Elena, and a few other colleagues from past projects. Sarah, too, had found her place in the world, leading workshops for women in recovery and finding a deep sense of purpose. She had even started a small group for personal development with Anna, combining her experience as a therapist with her passion for writing and public speaking. They had both found what they needed: closure, growth, and understanding. Michael had discovered that success was not just about work, and Sarah had learned that peace didn't come from avoiding pain but from confronting it with grace. As their paths crossed once more, both were content, not with the past, but with the future they were now creating. The year was closing, and the world seemed to have shifted beneath their feet. Michael had spent much of the year reconnecting with the world around him, meeting new people, tackling new challenges, and rediscovering his passion for life beyond his work. In the weeks following his return to the city, he realized that the external validation he'd been chasing wasn't as important as building meaningful connections. He had grown closer to his colleagues, people who were not only professional companions but genuine friends. His work now felt less like a treadmill of endless tasks and more like a space where he could thrive, contribute, and grow. His phone pinged one evening, and as he glanced at it, he saw a message from Maya. "Hey Michael, how about catching up next week? It's been a while since we had that heart-to-heart." Michael smiled, knowing that despite everything, his friendship with Maya had become one of the most valuable things in his life. For Sarah, things had taken an unexpected turn. Her new relationship with Anna had been nothing short of transformative. Together, they had been working not just on personal healing, but also on spreading their knowledge to others. Sarah had built a small but passionate support network for women recovering from abuse, while Anna had focused on growing her own practice. They had created a partnership that wasn't just about romantic connection, it was about mutual growth and respect. One evening, as they sat in Sarah's cozy living room, Anna turned to her. "Sarah, I'm really proud of everything you've done this year. Your work is so important, and I know it's not always easy. But you've really found your purpose." Sarah smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. I think we're both on a path that's more aligned with who we really are. I feel like I'm finally understanding what it means to heal, not just from the past, but to heal myself." Anna squeezed her hand. "You've come so far. And I'm here for the next part of the journey, whatever it looks like. Months later, life had woven a strange, almost serendipitous thread between Michael and Sarah again. It had been almost a year since they last saw each other, and the passage of time had allowed them to reflect, grow, and ultimately let go of any remaining animosity. One afternoon, Michael was back in town for a brief break, having wrapped up another successful project abroad. He decided to take a walk through the city, a city he had once considered home. As he strolled along the streets, he spotted a familiar face, Sarah. She was sitting on a bench outside a cafe, looking serene and content, as if she had finally found a piece of herself that she had been searching for all these years. The sight of her brought a wave of nostalgia, but it wasn't painful. In fact, it felt peaceful. He hesitated for a moment, but his feet moved toward her, almost instinctively. When she noticed him, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Michael," she said, standing up to greet him. "Sarah," he replied, his voice softer than expected. There was no tension, no discomfort. Just two people who had shared a part of their lives and had moved beyond it. They sat down together, talking as though time hadn't passed at all. They shared stories of their personal journeys, how they had found new purpose in their work, how they had each rebuilt their lives after everything had fallen apart. There was no bitterness, no lingering questions about what had happened between them. It was just a simple, genuine conversation between two people who had been through hardship and had come out the other side stronger. After a few hours, as the sun began to set, Sarah turned to Michael. "It's funny," she said. "When we were together, I thought I was living the life I was supposed to. But now, I realize that the best parts of life only came after I let go of the need to control everything." Michael nodded. "I get that. I used to think success and achievements were everything. But now, I see how much more fulfilling it is to have meaningful relationships, to find peace with yourself." They shared a quiet moment, and in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change or a magical reconciliation, it was just an acknowledgement of the journeys they had taken and the people they had become. Neither one of them was looking to rekindle a past relationship, but they both recognized how far they had come. There was no need for a grand gesture or closure. The story they had shared had run its course, and both had moved on. The rest of the year flew by, and both Michael and Sarah found themselves more connected to the present than they ever had been before. Michael continued his work abroad but also found time to come back to his roots and reconnect with the people who mattered most. His bond with Maya deepened into a solid friendship, and together they explored new ventures and started projects that blended their work and personal passions. Sarah, too, had continued her work with Anna and the support group. She wrote more, spoke at conferences, and found joy in mentoring others. Her relationship with Anna continued to flourish, and together, they were building a life filled with love, purpose, and mutual respect. As the years went on, both of them learned that life wasn't about seeking revenge or forcing things to be a certain way. It was about embracing the unexpected, accepting the past as part of the story, and moving forward with courage and hope. In a quiet moment one evening, Michael stood on a balcony overlooking a bustling city. He was back in the place where it all started, and he felt a profound sense of peace. He thought about everything he had been through, about the people he had lost and the people he had found again. And he realized it was all part of the journey. The struggles, the pain, the losses, they had all shaped him into the person he was today. Meanwhile, Sarah sat in a cafe, typing the final lines of her new book. She had found healing, peace, and a sense of purpose she never imagined. Her heart was light, her mind clear, and for the first time in years, she felt truly at home in her own skin. And just like that, Michael and Sarah's journeys remind us all that healing is possible, no matter how dark the past may seem. It's never easy to move on, but the courage to face what we've been through is what shapes us into who we're meant to be. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey today. If you resonated with Michael and Sarah's story, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a similar challenge? How did you find the strength to move forward? Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. We post new videos every week that are sure to inspire, uplift, and spark meaningful conversations. Remember, your story matters, and we're here to share it together. Stay tuned, stay connected, and keep moving forward.